How you guys doing? Welcome aboard the next video. Today we're going to be doing some recent finds. This past Sunday I actually picked up a few games at my local game store. And one of the games that I will be showing today is actually a hidden gem on the PS1, and that will be the last game. So the first game that we're going to be talking about is Road Rash 3D, as made and produced by EA. Now this one is complete in box, and I found it for about $5, and you can typically find this on eBay for about $8. Now I have beaten Road Rash to death over the past few weeks. I've already done a history video of the Road Rash series explaining how they got started all the way up to where they are today. Now Road Rash 3D didn't really have a whole lot to bring to the table, but they did continue with a really amazing soundtrack in the game. Now, like I said in those videos, Road Rash actually went away from the hack and slash basically aspect of the game and focused more on the racing, which you can actually really see in this game, because when you're trying to hit people and all these other things to knock them off their bike, it takes a million freaking years to do it. Not to mention, when you're trying to hit the brake to get them, it takes too long to do all that stuff, so then you have to focus on winning the race at the end of the day. It's still not a bad game, it's a pretty good racing game. One of the issues that I ran into with is that, well, what's pretty cool is each bike has different abilities, different aspects, different stats, different performance stuff. And with certain bikes, like one that's like a Harley, that one is a pain in the ass to steer. You'll find yourself using the brake a lot with that. One of the other things is that I was playing this on the PS2, since we all know it's reverse compatible for PlayStation 1 games. And this game, you can clearly see, was designed for the D-pad, not joysticks. Because when I used the joysticks, it was a lot more difficult to control than if I just used the D-pad. Although it's still a fun game, there wasn't really a whole lot for it to offer. They didn't really change much of anything. They just kept going with the same old, same old. Either way, I would chalk this down as a decent game. Not the greatest thing in the world, but still a fun game. But it's not really going to have you coming back for more, unlike other games that we could be getting, which is why, for cheap, this game would be worth getting into your collection for collecting. After all, the Road Rash series was a really great phenomenon during its time, even though it's not well known by today's retro gamers. Now the next two games actually tie in together. They're also on the PlayStation 1, and the first one will be Tom Clancy's Rainbow Six. Now I found this one for $3, and you can actually find this one on eBay for about $5, but it's not worth $5.
Its code name is Rainbow.
So in the very beginning of the game, or I should say in the very beginning of every mission, you have to actually pick your team, and it's teams of 3. You have to coordinate them in the right locations, you have to put people to the right positions, whatever they're qualified for, and execute while you play. Now, this is where a lot of the problems come in for this game, particularly for the PlayStation. In this specific version of Tom Clancy's Rainbow Six, the AI really lacks in what they are able to do. For instance, if some of them go down a corridor and they're supposed to clear rooms, instead of opening the doors or checking the rooms if the doors are already open, they just run straight past them and go all the way to the end of the corridor. What happens then is a whole masquerade of enemies shooting your allies in the back. So you have to quite literally play the missions 20, 30, 40 times over until you can actually beat it with very minimal or no casualties. Now that's one of the worst aspects of the game. Another aspect of the game is that you cannot take complete control and give commands to your team once you start the mission. You at that point become a lone wolf, and by shooting everything that you see or whatever you can do on your own, but you always have to be careful on checking your corners. As we always say in the military, check your 6. And then you can switch between each team, but you can only take control of one individual. This can make for some pretty sloppy gameplay, especially when it's supposed to be a tactical first-person shooter. You should be able to, in a lot of ways, just like what SOCOM did on the PS2, which they got it from the Rainbow Six series, but they really implemented it very well, where you're the team leader, you give commands to the rest of your team, they have to execute it. However, the AI in this game is so terrible, I really don't see it doing very well. I mean, it's really a draw of the card. Whatever card you landed on depends on what good might come out of the outcome. Now let's go ahead and talk about the next game that ties into this. Tom Clancy's Rainbow Six Lone Wolf. This isn't really a complete game if you ask me, because it's only got 5 missions. But I found it for $3, and on eBay complete in box, like, I found ones that were for $9 at the least complete in box. And it's really not worth $9. It's not even worth $3 if you ask me. But it was cheap, and I got it for free since they do a deal there at the store. Because if you buy 3 games, you get a third one free if it's a certain price or below, and I got this one for free. I figured, why not? When it comes to Lone Wolf, there's not really much to add to this one except for it's named Lone Wolf for a reason. I mean, in this game you're doing missions solo. I mean, technically it's the sequel to the original Rainbow Six on the PS1. But in this version of Rainbow Six, you're just going solo, doing stealth missions and things like that. Really simplistic, and it's not too bad of a game, but still not worth an entire price of a game because it only has 5 missions, like I've said. With only 5 missions, you don't have a full game. This is more like an early form of what an expansion would look like to a game. Now, the next game that I got was one that I actually saw on the shelf, and I was like, I need to have that game. And that is Metal Gear. I've been after this game for a hot minute, and I found this game for roughly about $10, and on eBay it's also about the same price. One of the most famous things about Metal Gear is the very first guard that you come across when you start the game. I feel asleep. Now you have to really start to wonder what kind of people they had working in the translations to these games that they were doing back in the 80s and 90s. There were so many grammar and punctuation errors, it was ridiculous. And this right here is just a proper way of showing how one thing means in another language means something entirely different in another. Now, I'm not trying to crap on the Metal Gear Solid series, and if for those that don't know, this is a part of the Metal Gear Solid series. But the creator of the series was quite upset at this game because it said Metal Gear in the title, yet there was no gear to be fought as a final boss. Instead, we got this thing, which doesn't even resemble anything near what Gear's supposed to be. This is absolutely ridiculous, but this is what we ended up with, and to be fair, it's close enough. To be fair. At least it was fairly close, but it's still not the same thing, and that's what really sucks about it. But at the same token, it was still a fun boss fight. There is the other thing as well that a lot of people always say. As many gamers would say, not having a gear as a boss in a Metal Gear game, since it's in the title, would be the same thing as having a Legend of Zelda game but no Zelda to rescue in the castle. This was fairly upsetting, as many people can imagine, and that was one of the least of the problems that this game had. Being an early stealth game, it did have quite a lot of things to try and put out there for people to actually be able to play and have fun with it. The thing is that in this game you had to be very careful with what you did. So if you picked up an item, you had to be very careful not to skip the text if you weren't sure what kind of item it was. In order to do this, you didn't have to refrain from hitting the A or B button, but instead you had to refrain from holding one of the directional buttons, because that caused it to skip the text. And in this game, to pick up items, you have to run into them, which means holding down one of the directional pads to pick up an item. So the moment you pick up an item, you let go of the directional pad. One of the issues with the game. Another issue was traps. There's a specific item for that, which didn't work like it was intended. All of this aside, at least when you died, whatever items you had on you when you start over, because that's how it worked in this game. You die, you start over. At least you started over with all the items that you had. It was a fun and challenging game, and that's one of the reasons why Metal Gear was so popular and so great to play. It did have its faults, it did have its quirks, but because it allowed you to keep a lot of the items, it made it so much easier for you, yet still challenging, because it was a game truly made for trial and error. But of course you also had to be very careful because enemies would respawn, whether you enter a vehicle, a truck, going from one area of the map to the next, you know, going from panel to panel, they would respawn. So that was something you had to really learn from and just use trial and error. It was just very difficult. Now the next game is by Data East, and that is Rampage. I've been on the lookout for this game. Wasn't really on my top priority because they're never really that cheap. Now I got this one for $10, but they usually go for about 14 bucks on eBay or even more. Now let's talk about a very popular arcade game during the 80s and 90s, and that is Rampage. Now I played this one as a kid, but not in the arcades, nor on the NES. Actually, first time I ever heard of it and played it was on the very first PlayStation, called a game called Rampage World Tour. That game I was introduced to 3 characters, but we won't talk about that game until I find that one at a later time, even though I do have it in a bundle package called Rampage Total Destruction. But anyways, Rampage on the NES has 2 characters, one George and one Lizzie. George, of course, is supposed to be King Kong, and Lizzie, of course, is supposed to be an Americanized version of Godzilla. You can only pick between the 2 characters. However, in the arcade version during this time period, you had 3 characters, those 2, and a giant wolf that was named Ralph. All 3 of those characters do make an appearance in later on versions of the game, like the ones I just previously mentioned before mentioning this. Anyways, this game did allow you to play 2-player. You could only play as those specific characters, George and Lizzie. They didn't have Ralph. They opted out of him. I don't know why, but, there is that. You do have infinite lives in this game, so, it's fairly easy to beat, but I think it's like 4 or 6 hours of gameplay before you make it all the way to the end, beating it. So it does take some time and consumption to be able to actually beat this game. Not that that is difficult or anything, and some of the things to take notes on is that there are certain things that you can eat in this game that will gain you health or take away health. You hit a toaster, you get fried, you get shot with bullets, glass, bombs, all sorts of stuff. And then you can also eat cakes. If there's a toaster, you can wait for the toaster to pop toast, and you can eat the toast. All sorts of things. You can even eat people. Interesting thing about 2-player is that if you play 2-player and your buddy loses all of his health, he'll run around butt naked, and if he doesn't transform back into its giant self, you can then eat him. Anyways, I'm not going to waste too much time with this game, so we're going to go ahead and move on to the very last game, and finally the hidden gem for the PlayStation 1. Now for the last game, a hidden gem on the PS1, and this game I have been on the lookout for a long time. I have a lot to say about this game, so be prepared for this one, and that is Bushido Blade. Now I found this copy complete in box for $12, but if you go on eBay, they're usually about 20 bucks complete in box and then some. Bushido Blade is definitely one of those hidden gems that you never hear being talked about, at least hardly ever. Or no one really knows the name of it neither. No one I've ever talked to has ever heard of this game. Especially people who love retro games, I've rarely ever ran into anyone who's ever heard of this. Bushido Blade is like a mixture between Street Fighter and Ninja Gaiden. You have 6 characters that you can select from, and of course don't expect much from the storyline, although it's a short storyline. It's simplistic, it's very simple. The title really runs in a lot with what's going on in the game. Bushido is basically the Japanese word for honor. Now what is Bushido Blade? Bushido Blade is a sword fighting game. You can pick between different kinds of weapons, and if you will actually notice in the fighting, there is no timer and there is no health bar. Now why is that? Well, in this game, one straight hit in certain areas will kill you instantly. And the sound it makes when you hit the rematch button is awesome. Other areas will not kill you but injure you, so if you're using a two-handed weapon and you get hit in the arm, you are resorted to swinging with one arm. If you get hit in the leg, you are resorted to going down onto one knee. I have seen some rare instances myself where there have been times where I've played against other people and we've had a lot of fun with it, but I've had times where we've hit each other at the same time and killed each other at the exact same time, ending in a draw. And there's also been one occurrence that I've actually seen specifically. It's never been caught on gameplay footage as far as I know, but there is an instance that can happen, and I've seen it happen myself, where you can go completely paraplegic. You can't use your arms, you can't use your legs, and still win. Like, I've seen that happen one time. It was really interesting because it was like watching a fish trying to fight a samurai. It was pretty funny, but he still managed to whoop my ass. It was a CPU that this happened with me. It was just absolutely ridiculous. And it's really hard to hit somebody when they're on the ground flailing around, and if you get too close, because they're flailing around, they might hit you, and you're sitting there trying to stab the ground, and they just won't freaking make it easy on you. But yeah, this game is absolutely amazing. I can actually, the controls are so simplistic, and let me just go ahead and explain that to you. So here are some of the controls. Well, I'd probably be better off explaining on a better controller. There we go. So now let's explain this with an original PlayStation 2 controller. Triangle is your high attack, circle is your medium attack, and X is your lower attack. R1 and R2 button switches between a high and low stance, and your square button is actually a parry. Easiest freaking controls in the world. Double right for dash right, double left for left dash, so on and so forth. Easy enough. Now, despite how easy that might be, it seems a lot easier than what it really is, because it does take a lot of skill, timing, patience, and it really is a game that tests your patience as well. Because when you're playing against other players, a match can last anywhere between a few seconds to a few minutes. One of the really cool concepts about this game is that the maps are actually quite big for fighting maps, because you can run away from your enemy for quite a distance. And in some environments you can actually destroy the environment, like the bamboo field. In the bamboo field you can actually cut down bamboo trees. That's actually pretty cool. This game had a lot of concepts going for it, including allowing a first-person sword fighting mode where you can actually fight in the first person. You can actually do this in two-player if you can link up two PlayStations together to play two-player. This has been done before. It's actually really interesting. Now, this game is not that expensive, and it is a very, very good game, although it did need a lot of work still, despite being really good as it was. You could tell it seemed like a prototype to a bigger and better franchise that they planned on doing. That's what it seemed like. But the creator to this entire thing actually talked about wanting to redo or remake Bushido Blade onto the Oculus Rift. So if he were to actually do that and succeed and make a very successful game on the Oculus Rift, you could actually see this game double, triple in price, maybe even 5 times, 6 times the price. But that is just a theory. As time goes on, this is going to be a lot harder to actually find, because they only made so many copies. In Japan alone, they only sold 380,000 copies. Worldwide, it was only close to 500,000. So you can imagine the amount of copies of this game are not very, they're few and far in between. Now don't forget, guys, I do a video every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. Clicking that like button really does help out with the channel. It gets us more recommended to others the more like button clicks we get. Like I said, I do retro game history videos. I'm working on hidden gems, so that way I can try and find games that you guys probably never heard of that you can go out and collect for. and I will be starting collecting for Super Nintendo games. So as always, remember 22 and stay classy, bros.